From the author of Spinsterella, the strange and unusual romance and spellbound, a darker shade of black comes the legendary Emasculation. Pick up the conclusions of the Spinsterella trilogy in paperback and e-readers this Halloween. It seems like the producers of the CW television shows Arrow, The Flash, Legends of Tomorrow, and Supergirl have some sort of issue with heterosexual black men. And it seems like every chance they get and they put on an episode, they try to find some way to degrade the image of a black man or find some way to emasculate a heterosexual black man. And one of the most egregious examples I saw was on last night's episode of Arrow. Now, on last night's episode of Arrow, John Diggle was established as the new Green Arrow, and he was taking over for Oliver Queen, who said he wanted to take some time to go spend with his son. So now we've got John Diggle, who is the black man who's going to be the Green Arrow. Really, he's just the butler taking over for his boss, because John Diggle has been nothing more than the butler on this show. But this role of him taking over as the Green Arrow is another passive-aggressive swipe at heterosexual black men and the competency of heterosexual black men in leadership roles. And this episode starts out with an opening scene where John Diggle and the Team Arrow are taking on some criminals, and your John Diggle is shown not using the bow and arrow like Green Arrow does. He's just beating people up. And again, this goes back to my point about this man being grossly unqualified to be the Green Arrow. John Diggle is very skilled with his military experience. He's a good tactician. He's a good fighter. But he's not the Green Arrow, and he's not qualified to be the Green Arrow because he doesn't have the experience to be the Green Arrow. And the main qualification is he doesn't know how to shoot arrows. But they make him the Green Arrow, again, because this is a passive-aggressive jab at heterosexual black men in saying that we gave this guy who was the butler the leadership role, but he couldn't handle the leadership role. And as the episode progresses, we see your John Diggle being set up to be the patsy by your Greg Berlanti and Mark Guggenheim, the producers of this Arrow show. And as they set him up to be the patsy, to be shown as this grossly incompetent person, they show him in a combat situation, freezing up, and then you have Wild Dog trying to undermine his authority by asking what decisions he should make and what action he should take while this truck is being hijacked and they're stealing whatever this chemical is. And then they decide to just go on. He goes on emotion, and it leads to the team winding up in a situation where the criminals get away with the chemicals. And that, again, was also meant to show that your John Diggle really was not qualified for this role, but they're going to put him in it anyway so they can make him look like a complete fool. As this episode progresses, we see Wild Dog continuing to undermine John Diggle's leadership and John Diggle's authority, and he does this by going to Oliver and asking him to come back as the Green Arrow. Now that action right there, that was designed to show that this guy Renee had no respect for John Diggle's authority as the leader and had no respect for his position as the leader. He still saw him as secondary because Oliver Queen wasn't there, and he saw Oliver Queen as the leader. And that's a main tenet of white supremacy. Now, when it comes down to white supremacy, most people are conditioned to believe that the white man is the leader, even if he puts a black man in charge of things. And instead of them respecting the position of leadership of that black man, they all go and submit and defer to the white man. And that's what I saw with the Wild Dog going to Oliver Queen in one of those scenes, him undermining John Diggle's authority as a leader and undermining his position as a leader and asking him to come back. And that was a very powerful position in showing the emasculation of a black man, because if you are a black man, you are supposed to be the leader, and if you're in a leadership position, your subordinates are supposed to be able to respect your decisions in the field and respect your authority in the field. But that wasn't happening on this episode. But this episode continues on, And after they go on to take on these criminals for the climax of the show, we get one of the darkest parts of the show, and it comes up after they make efforts to try to help John Diggle by giving him a crossbow to shoot arrows with because he's not qualified to shoot arrows. We then see later on him taking some drugs or buying some drugs from a dope dealer to deal with the issue that as relates to his arm. And again, all of these things are done so that this black man can be shown as someone who is not competent or capable of taking on the role of a leader, that he is not qualified to be a leader, and he doesn't have the skills to be in a leadership position. And this was all done to be really passive aggressive and take a jab at heterosexual black men, heterosexual black masculinity, and black male authority. That's what I saw in that episode of Arrow, but most people, they'll just see it as, oh, this is just part of a storyline. But this storyline is set up to be done in a way that shows black men as not being capable of being a leader on the same level as a white man. And I saw that throughout that entire episode. Everyone questioning this man's leadership ability, questioning this man's authority, challenging this man's authority, undermining this man's authority, because they wouldn't do that with a white man. They would just sit there and submit to all of his decisions and not try to question them. With this guy, they go out of their way to question him, second guess him, and then try to figure things out on their own. And this is not what you want to see when you're looking at a black, heterosexual black man. This is what people want to present as a heterosexual black man, but this is not showing us a picture of black male intelligence, black male leadership, or black male competence. And this is done because your producers like Greg Berlanti and Mark Guggenheim have a serious issue with heterosexual black men and the image and the presence of heterosexual black men. And because they're uncomfortable with the idea of being around a heterosexual black man, they wind up doing things to passive aggressively degrade him and emasculate him on this show. And this is a clear example of what SJWs do when they are in the presence of black men who are heterosexual. They go out of their way to try to find some way to degrade them because they cannot fit them into the narratives they have for heterosexual black men. They cannot make them into a stereotype, and they don't want, and because they can't make them fit their narrative, they try to do things to present them in some ways as some sort of incompetent or some sort of incapable because they feel inadequate about being in the presence of strong, masculine, heterosexual male, black male leadership. And that's what I saw on that episode of Arrow. And I said this was going to happen with this show because I knew what these producers' track record was as related to the presentation of the image of black men. I knew about the history with what they do with black men. And I see what they're getting ready to do with this whole John Diggle as a new Green Arrow. What they're going to do is try to find a way to make this guy appear to be extremely incompetent, dependent on drugs, and then eventually have him start getting crazy. And then you're going to have the great white savior Oliver Queen come in to take down the crazed John Diggle, and then he has to take over as the Green Arrow again. And that's, again, all about promoting the whole concept of white supremacy. And this is one of the problems many black comic fans like myself have with the comic book industry and with adaptations of superheroes, is that promotion of white supremacy and saying that the black character isn't on the same level as white characters, and that efforts are made to make them appear to be inferior. Because that's what I saw on that episode of Arrow. Everything was about not making John Diggle on the same level, or just putting him in a position to set him up so he can take a big fall, so that SJWs can say, oh, we gave this black man this position of power and responsibility, but he couldn't handle it. And that's something that many racists used to do when affirmative action first came out. Because when affirmative action first came out, what white racists would do is they would go out here and find a grossly unqualified black man, put him in a position of power and responsibility, watch him fail,
and then say, oh, we gave this black man this position, but he couldn't handle it, when in actuality, it wasn't about the person they put in the position, it was that they put the wrong person in the position, and they deliberately did this so that they could say they didn't have to hire any more black men, when in actuality, there were plenty of qualified, capable, responsible black men who could handle that role, but they didn't want to deal with those black men, so they found themselves a nice patsy to put in the position to take the fall so they could go back to business as usual. And that's how they manipulate affirmative action. This is one of the problems people have with your SJWs, because they're just like the old liberal racists of the 70s, their grandfathers, and they use the same tactics as their grandfathers. And when I watched this episode of Arrow, I saw the same tactics that liberals use to try to degrade the black male image that many racists used to use during the period when blacks were first coming in to the job market through affirmative action. So this John Diggle as the new Green Arrow is nothing more than an affirmative action hire, no different than your Sam Wilson as the Falcon or your Riri Williams as Ironheart. They're just put there to be a symbol of diversity, but they're actually passive aggressively there so that the white characters can appear to be superior, because most comic creators and most people in this industry don't want to go out of their way to create real characters of color to compete with white characters and stand on the same level as these white characters. When I look at what was happening on that episode of Arrow, I saw a clear case of SJW diversity, and one that's so clear to me that it's just not funny. And watching this show it just really disgusts me, because there's no reason to bring this into this show. When I looked at that first episode, it looked like the show was starting to make a turn for the better, but it seems like because your Mark Guggenheim and Greg Berlanti can't get over their issues with black men, the show just can't actualize its potential and be as great as it possibly could be. If you'd like to see me make more videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon by clicking the link in the description box. And if you want to try some of my great SJS Direct titles like the ISIS series, the E-Steam series, The Temptation of John Haynes, and many others, you may do so by clicking the link to Amazon.com in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.